I think it's time to get back to the dialogue. We have invited different perspectives, maybe not all of them directly related to your work, but I think that is going to be interesting to know also experiences from the people here. We have you, but also Imma Oliveras, that has been collaborating with you, and now is in France. Imma Cebrian is from the underwater, studying the Mediterranean and maybe other areas of the the marine ecosystems. And Beatriz is working on a lot on recovery of ecosystems after fire and the management prevention for preventing fires and how to change the structure. So the idea now is that you've been talking already. So at the moment, first we give the word to Imma, Emma, and Beatriz, maybe in this order if you want. And then the idea is that you express what you feel, what the presentation, your own experiences, and then we start the dialogue in that way. Maybe they can ask you questions. That will be good. And then after this kind of dialogue, the idea is then we bring the discussion to the room. Yeah?
Okay. I haven't really prepared anything for this. This is a dialogue, and listening to Yadvinder is always very inspiring. I've seen him throughout the years, how his presentations have evolved, and it's really nice to see how through the years it's coming more comprehensive towards this whole metabolism idea, which is really, really powerful. I think that it's a new vision, that it's really, really powerful. And as someone that has always thought through the disturbance lens, I've always worked with how communities, plant communities and ecosystems, but from the plant perspective, absorb or get impacted by different disturbances, droughts, heat waves, fires. I think there is a lot of powerful things that you were saying. And maybe my first reflection is, well, if we think on a world in which fire has been deeply disturbed as it used to be, so now it is in place where it didn't used to be, and it's not in places where it used to be, or it is in the wrong way, how do you think your perspective of metabolism can contribute to improve our knowledge on how fire is within this whole metabolism?
Do you want me to respond now or wait? No, I think, well, firstly, I think savanna ecology was ahead of many fields of ecology in recognizing the importance of, is this on? Yeah. That's great. Okay. Yep. But I think savanna ecology was advanced in ecology in recognizing disturbance as a core driver of shaping ecosystems. And I think Imma was. I think you were the first savanna ecologist in my lab, and I think your thinking about savanna certainly influenced my embracing of disturbance and its value. And so I think in terms of how an energetic view can shape our thinking of ecology, I think one of the things it does in all ecosystems is it's a value neutral in trying to look at what the ecology of the functioning of the ecosystem is doing in terms of its species and its ecological processes. So it gets away from saying what ought to be there as this idea of a past baseline of 100 years ago in Catalonia, this was the fire regime, so this is what we should try and achieve. And I think that we have to get away from that because we have no choice, because there's so CO2, warming, all these factors are changing the fundamental drivers. And what it does do is perhaps just look at the ecological functions in a value-neutral way. And then we can look at, does this changing fire regime amplify abundances of key species, the energy flow through those species, or diminish them, and then trade them off against other factors, like how does this affect human needs or key species that we might want to protect for other reasons. And so I don't have an immediate answer for any, because obviously fire is always very context specific. We don't want fires going into the wet Amazon rainforest because it's causing lots of declines in biodiversity and things. But shifting fire regimes, they've always shifted throughout the Holocene. And sometimes our baselines are always a little bit arbitrary of 1800 or 1900. And so perhaps it just gives another way of looking at ecological function that can be part of our decision making. I don't want to claim, maybe the talk gave an impression that energy is the answer to everything. I don't want to claim that. It's another way of looking at ecology that complements other values and other ways of looking at it. And perhaps what it can do is perhaps be a little bit more value neutral about what species should be doing or shouldn't be doing than perhaps some of our more traditional ways of thinking.
Thank you.
Maybe switch on the...
Do you hear? Yes. Okay. No? See? I can. No. If not, I have a good voice, Okay, see? Thank you. No, I'm Imma, and first of all, I would like to acknowledge that the organization has invited me. When I saw that you were I thought, what I have to do here? Because I'm working mainly in marine ecosystems, and my approach to I'm also studying ecosystem functions, but probably my approach is more in detail, not just trying to fill somehow, to fill these boxes that then we need to do these flux or to assess the functionality and all that. And I'm more of like a field person, more than modeling and all that. And one of the things that I like when you present these global fluxes and this, and something that concerns me a lot is because at least in our systems or how we work, each time that we try to assess like a global estimation and all that, and you assess it in your system, it's different, These global patterns mainly fails when you try to assess in a particular case. And especially right now that environmental conditions change so much, for example, that is changing also the metabolism of the great herbivores or predators and all that. So one of the questions is how you think also that these global approaches can help us to also understand other functions like resistance, adaptation, or resilience of the ecosystems.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting question. I think I'm relatively novice when it comes to marine ecosystems or freshwater ecosystems. I think ecology is always this tension, I think, between the local contingency, the particular features that make a local ecosystem function or the way it is, which can be local environment, human history, biogeographical history, all these factors, and then the global underlying patterns and laws that drive them. And I've always been attracted by trying to pull out these global laws and patterns, but also I think I was talking to somebody in coffee break. Fieldwork to me is always important because fieldwork makes you humble about realizing how noisy the local context is, the peculiarities that make an ecosystem work the way it is. So I think we are at a state. My understanding of terrestrial ecology is stronger than marine ecology, but I think we are at a state where we're beginning to understand broad principles of resilience and the role that species diversity, structural diversity, all of these factors play in how ecosystems respond. But I think we also always have to be humble to realize that we can't over-apply these global patterns to any context, because the local noise is often very dependent on particular context. But at the same time, I don't think we should be hesitant about trying to look for pattern. Otherwise become natural history. We're just describing what's there. We have to look for underlying laws and patterns to be able to say a bit more about how the world works as a whole.
Yeah. No, completely agree. And also the people that is working as me at most of the times at local scale, we want to understand globally. Yes. But I have the feeling, and I don't know if, because you show your work and you're also doing a lot of field work, so it makes you understand much better what the outputs of your models, and you can be more critical. But actually, I have the feeling that as the tools, mathematic tools and the models are increasing in terms of accuracy, I don't know, the field data, we are improving from one side, while from the other side, yes, we are losing a lot of quality. So do you think that for example, we should trying to understand, and also if we want to recover ecosystems, put much more on effort on what we were doing like 50, 60 years ago, and not losing that to have better outputs of our global estimations?
Absolutely. I think I've always been a strong believer in field work. And there's a danger. The modeling tools are fantastic. Remote sensing is fantastic. We use both those techniques. But they're dangerously seductive. That you can think that you understand something because you have a map from a satellite, or because you've got a model with certain assumptions that makes predictions. And all of them are limited in the insight. They're important because we also need to generalize from our local, and both those approaches matter, but ultimately you have to be grounded with real observations. And part of our effort has been to build this global networks of observation in the tropics that has given us big insights into whether the rainforests are slowing down climate change, how they're responding to climate change. But they're always really hard to fund. Every time we have to come up with a new idea, a new grant, we can't just simply say, well, these long-term observations are important because they tell us about how the biosphere is changing. No one's funding that. We have to have a new, exciting idea for the next grant. And yet, look at the weather system. We understand climate change partially from the models, but partially because we have weather observations around the world that feed in and inform those models. And ideally, ecology would be the same. We have these ecological weather stations around the world that feed in to tell us how the biosphere is changing, and then we can respond to it.
Completely.
And I think also for my students, even if they're doing a modeling PhD, I insist they have some field work, because it makes them humble, but also it teaches them about how data is not perfect as well, that the field data also carry uncertainties, assumptions, and biases, and to use other products, you also need to understand that our measurements of the world are full of uncertainty and as well.
Completely agree, yeah.
Well, I want also to thank you, the organizers, for inviting me to the talk. Congratulations for your interesting presentation. In relation to restoration, to focus on restoration, I was impressed having a look to your recent papers. It's my sensation, you are trying to integrate the human part of the systems, the social part of the systems, trying to go to that socio-ecological resilience that we are asked to promote in the systems. And I was impressed by that. This, in my opinion, is a great way of implementing restoration. I wanted to ask you, do you think we need a new way of approaching ecology, integrating this holistic view, integrating more the social with the ecological aspects, in particular in relation to restoration, and in which way we could do that?
I think we certainly, in many contexts, in every context, ecology involves social aspects. Even the pristine protected areas are social decisions made about not having people in that system or whatever. So
Exactly.
everything is a social ecological system. So certainly we do. I don't know, how much this is new. People have been talking about social ecological systems for 10, 20 years and longer, but I think its practical implementation is still relatively limited. Maybe in the more human intensely managed ones like an agricultural landscape, we do that, but I don't think perhaps we recognize it enough in the more semi-natural, semi-wild ecosystems, that there are human decisions that are part of this, positive and negative. I'm a huge fan of what rewilding is trying to achieve, but we also have to bring in the challenges of human-wildlife conflict and these elements into that, to sort of see this as part of the decision. I think also philosophically, to me, I push back very much against the view that developed that humans are separate from nature. The Descartesian Western view, we came from the biosphere, we're part of the biosphere, we've been modifying the biosphere for more than 10,000 years. And so anything that happens in the biosphere has to involve a long history of human entanglement with the biosphere.
Yes, I also agree with that. But practically speaking, for instance, in an Amazonian forest or African tropical forest, when you mention traditional knowledge, which of course it's crucial, we need to understand it, do you really integrate this in your work, and in which way? Because we could do this also in Europe with our traditional knowledge, and I still think we don't do it enough.
Yes. Some of my team, less so some of the work I've described today, but some of our team who have more of an ethnographic, anthropological background have certainly tried to embrace the lessons to be learned from traditional knowledge. Even now in modern communities, some of them approach this idea of reverse gaze, looking from the gaze of the communities and how they're seeing technology and global change in these questions, and incorporating those views in. So I think it's an aspiration. I don't think we do, even my team doesn't do that enough, but I think certainly it's got to be part of the way we think. But as part of that is also to not, I feel, not overly romanticize traditional and ecological views. That indigenous people are in many ways just like anybody else, that they make decisions. Some are ecologically beneficial, some are ecologically harmful, and it's not as if they have the solution to the challenges we face. They have different perspectives that we can feed into the range of perspectives, and different indigenous peoples have different perspectives. They're not homogenous, but they're alternative views that can feed in and provide insight. So we're not just dominated by, for example, a Western system conservation mindset as the only way of dealing with the challenge we have.
Thank you.
Yeah, we went through species out of place, if you want, to simplify, because of the changes, and not prepared to overcome the disturbances. The measurements, detailed measurements to scale up or make a zoom, and also the importance of society. I think also that in mixing of the three things, we were yesterday in Prades, and we were looking at these long-term measurements that we need. And given the changes, the context that is changing, and we expose the ecosystems to what we expose, the changes we produce are exposing new challenges for the species that are distributed on Earth. What do you think, or how you see the importance of connecting scales, connecting monitoring, in order to, from just watching and measuring to the understanding?
Yes, yeah. I think, firstly, we need to work at a range of scales. And one of the advantages of modeling approaches is that you can accelerate those scales. You can get your insights and then try and say what's things going to be in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, which you can't just wait and see, because you can't then plan and intervene. I think what we saw in Prades, the long-term experiments, that's really rare and really unique. And obviously my understanding of what you've learned there is limited, but from what I understood, when you did the long-term drought experiment, you see initial responses, decline, drought stress. You see the system adjusting with winners and losers. The oak trees were losing to some of the shrubs overall, but then the beginnings of a new ecosystem emerging with a new equilibrium. This is very similar to the insights that some of my colleagues have found in the Amazon, where we've done a 20-year drought experiment, where we see initial resilience and then mortality, and then a new system organize itself. And that, I think, is a very Margollevian thought, again, about how ecosystems reorganize their energies around challenges, around changes. And what is emerging is a new biosphere that's inevitably human affected in multiple scales. But if we let it, it has more resilience and adaptability than sometimes we realize. So I guess my mindset is less of the fragile biosphere, but of this vigorous, dynamic, energetic biosphere that's under pressure, but it has lots of inherent energies that we can work with and channel to create something that's changed, as I said about our final diagram, but can still be vigorous and full of functions and vitality. So understanding, I think, the dynamism of the biosphere and how we can work with it and channel it and make decisions around that is a challenge, because no one is comfortable completely with change. You don't like to see the biosphere, the local ecosystem you grew up with 20 years ago changing because of global change or invasive species, all these factors. But it's happening, and many of those factors are beyond immediate control. So how we understand and how we can maximize what's emerging under those pressures, I think, is where ecological experiments, short-term observations, long-term observations, and then modeling and remote sensing all fit in to try and answer those questions. And we never have absolute answers. That's the nature of most science, or particularly ecological science, where we get our clues and guidelines and pathways that can help our decision-making. We're never going to have an absolute answer. This is the one thing you must do to solve this problem. The world is too messy and complex for that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take on a bit on this idea of the field data that we need, the long-term measurements and bridging the scales and the uncertainty. And as I look across the room, I think maybe a third of us is field ecologists. Then we have a young generation and things. And how do you think, what are the main, because we are living in a world, right, that it's all this big data now and these big models and all this they say, oh, we have this long-term remote sensing data. Well, it's 25 years. Well, if you go to certain satellites, you can go back up to 40 years. But how much of this data is relevant, and what do you think? It's a double question. What are the main data gaps that you think that we have at the moment in ecology science that we need to go, and we really need these young generations to go in the field and continue doing those measurements? And then how can we better sustain these long-term measurements in a world that is all against long-term data? It's the publishing system doesn't support it, the grant system doesn't support it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, lots of questions there. I think the data gap, I think part of your first part of your comment partially answered that, and I think part of that is deep time perspectives, that we are seduced by data, and I love big data. I use big data in lots of things, and I'm certainly not anti these new insights, but we're seduced a little bit by the fact that most of these data sets start in the 70s and the 80s, and we make these baselines, whether it's biodiversity, the Living Planet Index, about what the world was like in the 70s, or remote sensing and land use. We can be somehow it's a little bit like in literature now. Like now, everything, if it's not on Web on Science, people don't read it. So I'm guilty. Like I hadn't read Margalef's books until because it's not easily searchable in the Web of Science, so I think we get seduced by the volume of data, the flood of data in the present, and to understand ecology, we need the multiple century perspective as well of how ecosystems have shifted, both because of climate and other factors, but also how humans have been modifying ecosystems all the way back to the megafaunal extinctions. And how does that inform our modern ecological thinking? So as one example, as you know, when we worked in Brazil, in the savannah, Brazilian savannah ecology is fantastic in the Cerrado, but all around drought and fire, no perhaps recognition that the fact that 10,000 years ago there were elephants, and how many of the plants and those systems are perhaps adapted to these longer-term changes. That's just one small example. But so I think, to me, there are many data gaps in ecology, but perhaps the one that is most obvious, because it's not easy to address by big data, is the deep time perspective, which comes from paleoecology or from other tree rings or other approaches that you can do to understand, and archaeology and other areas, the deeper time perspectives. But then, in terms of current priorities, spatial spread is always a challenge. We've built this network in the rainforests, but the drier forests, the other lots of biomes that are really undersampled. If you look at the density of data sampling in Europe compared to Africa, it's very there's huge geographical biases in our understanding of the world, and that's dangerous because we can start building general laws from a small subset of the world. How do we keep it going? I think that's been the question of my career, trying to work out how we can support long-term ecological monitoring. We built up these global networks in the tropics, but even then I have to say that I've stepped away from running that because it's a constant challenge to find funding to do that and keep it observations. And in an ideal world, we'd have something the equivalent of the World Meteorological Organization. We'd have a World Ecological Organization that funded long-term ecological observations, the long-term ecological networks that do exist, but provided some secure funding, particularly for the less wealthy countries. Europe and North America, potentially there are challenges, but there are resources. But we need those observations in Africa, in South America, and other regions where there aren't the resources, so the resources have to come from outside to do that. That's the aspiration. The state of the finances of the UN are not great at the moment, so I'm not sure that's the source, but maybe there are other mechanisms, like some of the money coming into restoring nature, and maybe some of that can also go into monitoring nature as well. If we're trying to invest in nature recovery, will we see nature recovery when it happens? Will we actually have the data to tell us if we are succeeding or failing in our attempts to restore nature?
Yeah. Well, I'll just end up with that, but I'll see the challenge, because there is this need, and I agree with you, to challenge these baselines that we do from the past, and we need better understanding. And there's new techniques that are bringing, I don't know, in my field, there's this all pyrogenic carbon now in soils. You don't need the deep core, so you have new techniques coming through that are bringing new knowledge and challenging these paradigms of the baselines of the past. And I guess I'm not a paleoecologist. I don't know if there's anyone in the room. It'd be great to hear. But at the same time, with these pressing questions, and we want these long terms, why do we need to understand all this in the past when we want to see how it's changing today? So I think that we need to make a better argument on why we need all this, and to keep doing that, and maybe bring or push against this fast and furious and novelty and innovative trend that we are all going through. As scientists say, hey, science, we need to, still things don't move at a fast pace, even if we are moving in fast changes. So I don't know. And then I pose the question to my colleague Emma, is it the same, for instance, in marine ecosystems? Is it
completely the same? And sometimes I think that even we go in some things far behind, but in other things we try to be at the same page. For example, what you were saying, no? We still do not have a real knowledge of the baselines or how ecosystem functions. There are many things that I guess in terrestrial system also, but in marine system, the historical data, it's much more or less, the different observations that we have, it's much more or less. But now, for example, we try to be in the same page in terms of restoration. So we don't have money to monitor, to go to the field and sample, but there is plenty of money to restore. Mm-hmm. To restore what? Mm-hmm. And to restore how? And why? And what we want to restore, the functions, which, how they are ensured. We still don't have the mechanism, but we can use a drone. A drone and high technologies, environmental DNA, everything, we have everything. But we still don't know. And then we come with the scales of restoration. It's something that I wanted to ask you. Because I have the feeling, at least I move in the marine systems, and it also has come from the United Nations, the European Union, and all this money and all this big ball, I don't know how you say, no? That it has exploded. But I have the feeling that it's something top-down. The people do not know what they need to restore, do not know if they want to waste this money, do not know if it's better to preserve. Because now anybody's talking about conservation. It's at a higher scale, probably, maybe can be more efficient, I don't know. In many cases, well, I push for the conservation, but it's not, the model, it's not fancy, conservation. It's not fancy because you have to stop some activities, and no, we want to keep doing the same, but if we restore something very small, it's okay. And it's what you say, the science sometimes we should be saying, well, it's enough. And for me, it's quite frustrating. And I don't know, there is a lot not, but for few scientists that they work with these big revisions, big reviews, where the indicators can be the survival of the 50% of something that you have planted, and it's a success. Mm. It's not a success. Which functions you have with that? It's so difficult, I don't know. I don't know if you agree.
No, I agree. I think the ultimate success of recovery is that scale, and it's the connectivity, how much to go away from what you could call boutique projects, where you could have some beautiful conservation or rewilding in this nice little area here, and that's nice and it's satisfying. But to make a difference, it has to spread beyond those projects. And I think part of it is also, which is healthy, I think now, go away from conservation being just about protected areas to thinking about the wider landscape, the farming landscapes, the urban landscapes, and seeing them as ecosystems where a farm is an ecosystem, a city is an ecosystem. How can we think about the ecology and how they connect through as part of our whole integrated landscape, whole integrated region? I think the same applies in coastal systems and marine systems. So I won't claim to know all the answers to that, but I think that level of thinking is healthy. They've gone away from, we must just protect and put nature away from human activities. There are certainly spaces we need to do that. I'm not saying that the protected areas have value, but thinking about the whole range of human-modified landscapes as part of the challenge of what we're doing, I think is a key part. Yeah.
Well, I completely agree, but it's how it is. We are mainly thinking in the world range. But in the world range, we also need to have the really protected sites.
Yes.
What we don't like to see. Because 90 or more % of the wall is not protected. So we have the focus in all these systems. But we may need probably to keep these other systems more protected to better function all the other ones. I don't know.
Absolutely, that's part of that's connectivity.
Mm-hmm. Just to connect with what Imma was commenting and you, I was thinking that maybe one problem we have in ecology is that we are always working with figures and data, blah, blah, blah. And maybe we need more connectedness with the local problems, the situations, to avoid the top-down way of working that Imma was mentioning. And we need to change probably in many areas the type of governance. And of course, it's not only depending on us. It depends on many stakeholders and disciplines. But in my opinion and based on my experience, if you don't work in a more horizontal governance, taking into account the local needs, visions, ideas, and problems, blah, 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 which is very tough and time-consuming, etc., but you need to do that, you are not really implementing restoration. You are, I don't know, implementing a set of ideas that you designed on your desk, but restoration, I think it's quite integrative and holistic concept, and that's why it's so complex. I mean, we need to work in interdisciplinary teams to avoid the top-down approaches, to understand local problems related to the global ones, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And I think it's challenging, and as you said at the end of your presentation, it's so challenging right now to try to do something practical to avoid the dramatic changes we're facing too. Mm-hmm. How can we do it? I think it's a challenge. Mm-hmm. And probably because most of us, we are urban citizens and we have lost the connectedness with the nature, world, whatever. You know what I mean? This kind of connection is lost in many areas. So then we go to the field, we try to propose a plan, but we don't even understand the landscape in many senses, in a holistic way. I don't know if it's kind of philosophy, but
yes,
we have to connect philosophy with science.
Well, if I think about my own trajectory, my postdocs were in the ecology department, and then about 20 years ago now, I moved to a geography department, and with human geographers next to physical geographers. And I think one of the big insights around that time was ecology, the natural sciences were very good at describing the problems we face. But all the solutions involve the social sciences. Because people are, whether at the local scale or at the global geopolitical scale, it's people that will decide the solutions that we find to the ecological challenges. And as classically trained natural scientists, we're often not very comfortable with that. You know, the paradigm has been we present the problem to the politician or the community and say, this is the problem, you find the solution. And when they can't find the solution, we say, oh, they don't understand the science. And we've given the science. There's been a one-way sort of thing, here's the problem. So, and I think everything has to be a much more nuanced understanding of the context. And then you can still, I don't think there's a default, the local community is always correct about everything, or the political system. People all have their biases, their damaging traits but at least you start from a point of understanding, and then the dialogue begins about how we change this, or why we change this, and what we're trying to aspire to. But if you don't, just in terms of the survivability of a project, that's the only way forward. Unless you're an autocrat and you just say,
let's do that.
Expel people, the old model, expel people from the national park to protect it. And that model was wrong for many reasons.
One last question. Do you integrate these aspects in your teaching? I mean, the teaching activities are crucial, in my opinion, to motivate young people, to make them aware of situations, but not to block them or paralyze them by anxiety and echo. How to do this? Because it's hard to motivate without creating anxiety
Yes,
nowadays.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, yeah. Well, there are two different questions there. Do we incorporate social perspective? Yes, across our masters are very much interdisciplinary programs that the ecologists and the social scientists look at conservation and nature recovery and those questions. I think the anxiety one is a different one. And I think I was noticing, particularly by about 2015, 2020, that the generations of students coming through were full of climate anxiety, climate grief. And I think a little bit of my particular focus on nature recovery and restoration was partially driven by that. And also, I think the story that was coming through was of global destruction, and we have to halt it and stop it, or we're doomed. And actually, there's more agency. People have more agency in changing the pathway of the world. And nature recovery is often a good way of thinking through that as well, because you can do work at the very local scale, you can have agency, but it also cascades through to the larger scale. So it can tell us, it says the world is messy, the world is changed. It's undeniable, there is loss in the world, but then we work with what we have and we try and make the world better. So you just get on and do, and then the act of just getting on and doing is both good for you, but also obviously is good for the planet as well. So people sometimes ask me, am I a pessimist or an optimist? And I'd say, by personality, I'm an optimist, I'd say generally, but I often describe optimism as clear-eyed pragmatism. So it's clear-eyed, so you recognize the reality of the problems of the world. You're not saying, it's all going to be fine. But then once you recognize the challenges, you're pragmatic and say, what can I do? How can I individual, I as a department, I as a society, what can we do to make things better given the way the world is? And that I think is the way to find meaning as well as find a solution.
And keep the motivation we need. Yes, thank you.
And when you showed this bottleneck, the last slide I think was, and you showed 3 options passing through this bottleneck, and they were different type of just untouched system, maybe a bit more touched or disturbed, I don't know, and maybe gardening or producing food. When you have this global view, how much of each you have to reconcile all of them in this living biosphere? How do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think maybe that wasn't the intention on the right-hand side. I think the top was, on average, a biosphere that nothing's untouched. That was part of the message, that climate change, invasive species, everything means everything is touched. There's no returning, if you could ever, to some sort of baseline biosphere. But what it is it's still functionally vibrant, the biosphere. And at the other end, the bottom, it was more the idea of an industrialized biosphere, where the biosphere is turned into just being one sort of global crop for humanity, not just for food crop, but a carbon crop or an energy crop or whatever, that is just an industrialized, commodified biosphere. And so what I was arguing there is we want the first and not the second, and that vibrant biosphere is a mixture of protected areas, semi-natural spaces, urban spaces, agricultural spaces, all modified, but all we're trying to maximize, retain ecological vitality, ecological processes while producing what we need to in terms of food and other components, and avoiding perverse outcomes as well. So, one that I rail quite a lot against is energy crops. I think it's enough of a challenge to feed people and to give space for the rest of life on Earth, rather than asking for our energy system to also come from the biosphere. And so there's that adds pressure. So if we don't think in that biosphere way, there's a danger that in trying to solve climate change, we turn the biosphere into an energy farm. And the scales at which we can operate, that could happen. That's a serious possibility. So certainly, I think thinking about the vitality of the biosphere, of ecosystems, and centering that as a value is important. And then also recognizing ecosystems are much more than just the natural, nice protected areas. So maybe it's changing now, but I think when we grew up as scientists, there's always a bias to go to the nice protected national park. I loved going to the old growth rainforest, because that's pristine nature, that's fantastic. But actually, ecology is everywhere, and we need to work with that ecology everywhere. So encouraging urban ecology, agricultural ecology, all of these areas as part of a holistic understanding of nature is important.
Thank you. Now it's past 1, so maybe we could open the questions for the public. Is any questions that you want to raise? Yeah.
Thank you. Just thinking about the agricultural ecosystem and wondering how that can be improved. Because there is this division, there's this idea that land grown for food is therefore lost to biodiversity, and it doesn't have to be that way. But it would have to so dramatically change agriculture, and it would also have to be much more responsive to changes. And I sometimes think that comes from gardeners, because gardeners are watching minutely what goes on in their little ecosystem. And if sweet potatoes are doing well, you plant sweet potatoes next year. If your almond crops are failing because there's a late frost, you adapt. So how to make because agriculture and deforestation for agriculture is probably the biggest effect on the kind of global biodiversity, except for marine. So that's kind of how can we bring in the negative externalities caused by conventional agriculture and favour an agriculture which is more beneficial. And the other thing I just want to mention is that on the 15th of November, you mentioned the planetary boundaries. There's going to be a lot of workshops, including planetary boundaries, including living soils, the Modelfest.s, you can look it all up. They're interactive workshops where we work at all these subjects we've been talking about and try and find solutions from a citizen sphere, from a politician sphere, from a company sphere, and all the rest of it. Okay.
Any of you? First you.
Okay,
You start.
okay, all right. Yeah, I think the agriculture one is interesting. For the first thing, we've looked at this in the context of the UK, but it applies, something that's applied globally. There's various grades of agriculture, and so it isn't just agriculture or nature. There's certainly, say in the UK context, there's very low agricultural productivity lands, the uplands, the sheep grazing, the areas there, that you could certainly, they don't produce much in terms of food supply, and you could certainly come up with something which has higher biodiversity, while still maintaining traditional landscapes and livelihoods and respecting people's cultural values in landscapes. The challenge comes when you get to the more intensive agricultural landscapes. So you could meet, certainly, say, the UK's biodiversity goals by thinking about these marginal agricultural lands while maintaining high food production on the intensive lands. There's a bit of a debate between, do you just intensify, industrialize, maximize, and get as much food out of some land to minimize the footprint of agriculture? So if you really farm this area here, you're not having to farm that area there, so nature can recover. And I know some colleagues strongly argue that sparing argument is an argument for industrial agriculture. The other one is whether in those farming systems, those intensive ones, you can still have elements of ecological insight and thinking feeding into that, maintaining high yields while keeping ecological process. Yield is an important one. I think sometimes as ecologists, we don't have that sort of systems thinking approach overall, that if you lower yields and you still have to feed people, then the food has to come from somewhere else. And that can be, that can have an agricultural footprint maybe outside your country. So if we rewilded half of the UK, are we sourcing more food from Brazil and causing impacts there? So I think we have to think through that. And obviously, an ultimate big factor is diet. Even if we slightly nudged our diet away from meat and towards plants, that changes that equation, because then you can, growing for plants is so much more efficient than producing food stock for cattle or other meat. And so the demand side of that, rather than just the land side, is an important part of that calculation. That doesn't mean everybody has to be vegetarian. It just sort of means slightly shifting the narrative of how much meat we consume can have a much bigger impact than our land use decisions directly.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe I would add here, it's just a reflection of building up on what Yadvinder say, and I'm not, I wouldn't work with agricultural or things, but it makes me wonder in whether we have to also rethink our agricultural systems, because a lot of comes from outside nowadays. So we have stopped doing things that come even, our meat comes from deforestation in Brazil, or the veggies in the UK maybe come from Murcia. So a lot of things come and bring a lot of externalities. So we have to maybe think how we can make these productive systems a little bit more ecologically meaningful. I'm not that sure that we need to deforest new land for feeding the world. Maybe it's just becoming more efficient. And I would put here in the audience also the other side of the coin, which is waste. We are producing a lot of waste. There's a lot of food that is being wasted. So could we maybe, and well, the European agrarian policies are making to throw away a lot of products, as we know. So maybe it's bringing again governance and bringing maybe more transdisciplinary systems, transdisciplinary work. Should we, us as an academics, not work only interdisciplinary, but also transdisciplinary, so we can maybe influence the policies so they are more efficient and they reduce waste and things are redistributed more efficiently? It's just an open question.
Okay, thanks very much for the discussion. Actually, my question is a bit related to Imma's comment. It goes back to your proposal of this sort of energy-based view on how we make decisions on ecosystems. No? I see that, I see a lot of value in this, and I see it has a lot of value at the sort of local ecosystem level, but in a world in which actually energy is transported physically in space a lot by humans, not only by humans, but quite a lot by humans. So how can your framework effectively be applied in this context, now, considering that actually energy is flowing and we are moving it from one ecosystem to another?
Well, I think the energy flow paradigm gives extra insight into that as well. So there are other ways of looking at it, but if you look at the UK and we calculate how much of our food material is coming from different ecosystems, so the captured sunshine of China or the tropics, and how much of that captured sunshine ends up being consumed in the UK, it perhaps gives us another lens on thinking about these things. So I don't think that they're contradictory, if I understand correctly. You can still understand the ecological energetics of your local ecosystem and how that's affected or amplified by human activities. And then you can look at your society and look at how much of its energy footprint, its energy consumption, biological energy footprint is supported by the other other ecosystems, other biomes as well, and how much you're modifying those other biomes to support that your local footprint. So, to me, they're looking at different scales, and it gives many of these things. We have tools that already do this footprint analysis and things. So I'm not saying that energy flow is a brand new way of thinking about these things, but it does give a common currency that you can look at these different ideas.
Hi. Well, first of all, congratulations for many things. And I also think that many of us will agree if I say to also thank you for this effort of connecting your work to Margalef, no? And amazing that there are so many potential connections, no? And I wanted now to add one comment about one specific potential connection, and then one more general question also related to this, to Margalef's ideas and your own work, no? The specific thing, the specific issue, is that, well, I thought about this when you mentioned this study in so-called degraded areas, no? And their higher diversity and so on. That one point that Margalef made sometimes is that, well, he thought that there was an exploitation relation between mature ecosystems and immature ecosystems, and that it materialized in animals from more mature ecosystems going to feed in immature ecosystems, no? And then finding stability in more mature ecosystems, no? So there would be, according to his view, a connection rather than just a local issue. This is one point that I wanted just to throw away in case you find, I don't know, some kind of use to it, no? And then the more general issue is that when seeking this connection between ecosystem metabolism and diversity or perhaps other structural issues, I see you are putting the emphasis in productivity. I mean, after all of this that you read about Margalef, you may have noticed that he always emphasizes, rather than productivity, the ratio between biological production and biomass, no? The turnover of the ecosystems, that he thought that this had to do much more with, that this had a much stronger relation with ecosystem complexity, structure, with diversity or some kind of diversity. And I don't know if you have thought about this, or you see some way of advancing also, thinking in this other, taking this other variable, no?
Yeah, interesting question. So the first one about the human modified systems acting as a subsidy on the pristine, so animals coming and feeding on that. This is very much what we see. You know, when I published that paper about Borneo and the logged forest, I was quite concerned about how conservation ecologists would respond and whether they'd say, oh, this ecologist is giving people an excuse to log rainforests, and which is not what I wanted to say in that paper. But actually, I was surprised at how many people, ecologists, conservationists, came up and said, actually, yeah, this is what we see quite often, that in Borneo, the elephants and the orangutans love the secondary forest. That's where all the palatable leaves, the fruit are. The birds in Panama, you see many more birds in the secondary forest than in the old-growth forest because of the palatability of food. So there's quite a wide recognition that actually disturbed systems are often rich food sources that subsidize the undisturbed system as well. So that there hasn't been. It's not true everywhere, but I think generally, no. I think there's an interesting support for this idea. About the idea of Margalef and biomass, I'm not sure. I think I have to think through those ideas. And I think I wonder if it partially comes from our focal system, because a lot of my career has been in tropical rainforests, which are the old growth ones are in a semi-equilibrium ecosystems where biomass is equilibrated, whereas Margalef had a global perspective, but a lot of his work was from more dynamic limnological systems, or maybe terrestrial Mediterranean systems, which have different dynamics, much faster dynamics. Because what that paper in Borneo and others made me think about is biomass is frozen energy. So when you have an old growth system, a lot of not just energy, but a lot of the nutrients and other things are in the old growth trees, and they're no longer circulating in the ecosystem. And so what the disturbance does is recirculate that energy, that frozen energy. And a fire in a savanna perhaps does the same thing. And you can, I have to be careful about this argument, but you can argue that is where the ecological processes are amplified in a lower biomass system compared to a higher biomass system. And perhaps complexity. So what disturbance does, I don't know if it's, I think in many cases it can increase complexity rather than reduce complexity. In a forest, you start having gaps of light and shade. you have a mosaic as well of less disturbed areas, more disturbed areas. And so, yeah, I think I'd have to look at Margalef and think through those ideas and see see where I agree or disagree on some of those ideas. But I think the relationship between biomass and ecological function is not clear to me. And I think it may be in different directions.
It's this, more than biomass itself, the ratio between biological production and biomass is what he emphasized.
Yes, yeah.
So more the turnover of the system, no?
Yeah. Certainly, what we find in, again, this tropical forest bias is that disturbed systems have higher productivity than undisturbed systems. The circulation of nutrients, the shifts of plants towards more acquisitive traits rather than conservative traits, all of these factors amplify productivity after in disturbance. So the lower biomass is higher productivity. Yeah, I think there's lots to think through there. And I think it may just be different contexts that different dynamics apply.
Can I ask something in relation to the logged system? When you explained the case of the log system, you mentioned that, the vibrancy, you said it's growing because the plants invest more in growth than in defense, which from a first glance looks like positive consequence. But I was thinking the system becomes probably more vulnerable in relation to certain stresses or biotic stress in particular, if the plant doesn't invest so much in defense metabolism. And have you checked about these physiological changes that this could mean that the system is less and less able to cope with the future stresses or disturbances?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't think we know the answer to that, whether, at least in the case of forests, whether disturbed forests are more or less vulnerable. I think many cases, the higher ecological amplification, the plant traits, shifting to more plastic plant traits, might increase resilience and adaptability. But, and a counterexample, we do some work in the Amazon rainforest and how fire opens up an ecosystem. And there what we see, the feedbacks are microclimatic. So as a forest opens up, it's no longer shaded from heat in the same way, so things get drier, so it becomes vulnerable to the next fire. Exactly. And therefore, so fire changes the rules. Yeah. So I don't think we have a definite answer. If you ask me, I suspect that in a non-fire prone system, I think the disturbance increases adaptability. But fire changes the rules. And then things become more vulnerable, at least in a forest context. Yeah.
When fire comes in, I think definitely. Maybe with no fire, it should be checked through physiological changes and responses to different stressors, factors that come. Well, just one question. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your inspiring talk. You have put a lot of new questions in our mind. I'm working with wildlife management, and you have shown us the important role of mammals on the energy fluxes on the ecosystems. And I was thinking at the European scale, as you know, we have this phenomena of rewilding, which means we have increasing numbers of big mammals in many of our landscapes, from forests to cities. I mean, more wild boars, more deer, brown bear, wolves, lynx. All these large mammals are increasing in many places, in many parts of Europe. So I would like to know your opinion on terms, because I never thought about it, in terms of which ecological impact is going to have this increasing number of large mammals in the European ecosystems. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think broadly, I think it's a fantastic thing. I think we're starting. there's many aspects of nature recovery, but certainly the return of the increasing population of large animals in a densely populated country like a region like Europe is astonishing as a story of nature recovery. And I think maybe we don't make enough of that as a good news story. We're talking about anxiety and other things. This is a good news story. But at the same time, we have to be sensitive to all the social issues, the potential for human-wildlife conflict, and think through how to manage that. But in terms of ecological impacts, I think it's great in terms of many features, connectivity, flow of nutrients and seeds and other components, and herbivores, top-down control by predators that are building landscapes of fear, that are reshaping landscapes in terms of herbivores. So lots of ecological functions that have been lost from Europe over the last century are beginning, still a long way to go, but at least in parts of the landscape, those functions are beginning to return. And so you could argue that those landscapes are becoming more vibrant than they've been for over a century in many contexts. So I think it's a really important story to be told there, especially the scale and the connectivity. So it isn't little isolated rewilding projects, but this movement of animals across scales. There are social and cultural things to consider, but it's really, I think, I've been talking and working with some colleagues in India who've been working on the comeback of the tiger, which is also an amazing story that India, with all of its rural poverty and development issues and dense population, has been seeing increasing populations of tigers since the 1970s, and the data is getting stronger and stronger on this. And how is it that that human-wildlife conflict is serious? It isn't sheep being eaten. People get killed by tigers every year. And yet, this has been not just by top-down, there's a bottom-up element to this as well. And yet, if we're asking, we like the value of the tiger, we're asking India to live with the tiger, we're asking African nations to live with elephants and lions, surely we can ask Europe to live with wolves and bears and lynxes and these things as well. It's an equality issue. We can't just have the charismatic wildlife in Africa and India and not say, oh, we can't do it here because our farmers won't allow it, or our culture, our sheep are being eaten. So obviously there's cultural politics around this as well. But I think it's a part of, if we value wildlife, we can't just value it over there. We've got to value it here as well.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Otherwise,
okay.
Yeah. So where? Oh, yeah.
Yes, I had a question because recently my class and me made a trip around Barcelona to see and evaluate the different projects about urban nature that have been encouraged in recent years. And one thing I noticed here and in my hometown, which is about 30 kilometers from here, is that some of the, well, not some, almost all species of mostly vegetation, also maybe some insect hotels that have been installed, are not very similar in characteristics, both in physiognomy and physiological terms, to the local wildlife that we have here. For example, in my hometown, there are the dunes, which are a naturally occurring geological formation that mostly is made of very salt concentrated plants, so they have the capacity to endure. And many of the plants that I see in my town and here do not have the same characteristics. And one concern that I had is that these differences between the small cells or areas of nature that we are installing in cities do not have synergies with the current habitats that we have everything around these same cities. So I was wondering if that could have a negative impact on the cycle of energy, because, for example, any species that moves or disseminates its seed or pollen through pollinators, or birds, mammals. Well, the nucleus of the question is that if any of you think that we should aspire to a more dynamic model for urban nature, so we can create a more complex and accurate model of energy circulation through our cities.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, maybe others have some more comments on the local context, but I think, more broadly, it's great that you're bringing these ecological insights, and I think part of the context is using the wisdom of ecology in the local context, and ideally, people like you and others should be bringing those local ecological insights and saying, well, actually, if we're doing urban parks or other green spaces, let's embed the city in the landscape of that city. So think about what species like this climate, these soils, this connection to the outer space, to the outer regions of the city. And really, ideally, there are general patterns, but the more we can embed ecology in the local, the better as well. And I think I know part of the psychological reason for thinking about nature and conservation is reconnecting people with nature at that local scale. And maybe part of it is understanding actually how special those dunes outside the city are and how unique that ecology is. And let's bring some of that ecology and celebrate that inside the city as well. Certainly, the more we can connect locally, the better. I don't know if others have any comments.
I totally agree. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
You want to add something? No? Well, I think it's because we will have some times to visit the library too, because they have some exposure. But if any further questions in the room, please.
Good morning, congratulations for the conference. Edward Wilson wrote a book some years ago about the title Half of the Earth. So the idea is to preserve half of the biosphere and the other half for the humans. Do you think is this interesting or have some coherence with the metabolism? So what do you think if you...
It's a good question, potentially quite controversial. I think it depends a little bit of what you mean by preserving the other half. If we have a narrative of humans just in one half or in cities and the rest without people, I don't agree with that. I think the idea of somehow disconnecting people from nature and having nature here and people here is ultimately it's probably impossible anyway, but ultimately be very damaging for people. It would have huge ethical issues, other things there. So I would disagree with that. But I think a more generous interpretation is that at least half of the Earth is strongly social ecological. So we've got fully protected areas, but we've also got landscapes with lots of ecological vibrancy, nature recovery, with these elements in there as well. And then we have maybe less than half even, but maybe then people, more dense human-affected areas elsewhere. So I think there's definitely a middle ground where rather than that. I think maybe the half-Earth idea attracted attention because of its boldness, and I think there's something appreciation of that, of saying actually we need to make space for the biosphere, for its functions. That we can't have these scenarios of human domination of the planet with no space for other species, but also all the processes that maintain the planet and keep it alive. And so the boldness of the half idea was perhaps that attention. The danger of that idea is that it could be seen as a very top-down, saying, no people here, that ignores all of human history and entanglement with nature there as well. So I think in a softer form I think I can see the power of that idea, but not this. I think this eco-modernism sometimes has this idea as well of let's concentrate people in cities and then we can protect nature elsewhere, but leave people ultimately disconnected from nature. They see nature on their TV wildlife shows. And I think that would be a disaster for the human race to have that sort of perspective. We emerge from nature, we're part of it. Our well-being as a planet depends on nature, as a society, but also individually, I think in our reconnection to the natural world.
I think that it should be the contrary. We should connect much more in the nature to try to help for the well-functioning of the system. If we are keeping disconnected, I think that this is the main problem that we have.
I think so.
Anyway, probably these ideas are behind protecting the 30% in the 2030, no? But of course in a connected way, because if not...
Well, many thanks for the talk and for the discussion after that. For me, one of the things that it's going to be a question because I don't really know how to solve it, is how we do integrate heterogeneity in the bottom-up and top-down scale. It's very, from bottom-up, it's kind of easy because it's easier making average of things despite how the variability of the data kind of spread. It's challenging, but from the top-down approach, how we disaggregate the effects in order to be implemented at the local scale, for me it's one of the biggest challenges that I really don't know. For instance, a couple of questions ago, there was a question about what happened in that particular ecosystem that has... So in order to implement activities to restore ecosystem, for instance, you need data that it's taking at the same scale of aggregation, but also it's very species or local specific. So it's, at the end, we need to measure everything everywhere to have answers for that particular ecosystem or the other one. So I don't really know how to solve that from global or from regional patterns to something that could be used at the local scale.
Yeah.
I don't know. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge question. I think my instant reaction is, I think there are lots of allies at the local scale, which is the nice thing about ecology is that they're natural historians, they're people who understand and study the local birds, the local plants, and the more that wisdom and local knowledge can be China. That's just thinking in the Spanish urban context, but you could think local communities around the world. The more we can channel and support that way of using the local context so that perhaps the macro understanding of we need to have the rich bird life in these landscapes, for example, for all these multiple reasons, comes through from the macro level, and maybe some funding and resources come through linked to that. But then the local level is very involved in how those resources are used that bring in the local context and the sensitivity of that. So we come up with things that's sensitive to local ecological, but also social ecological context in terms of how to work. I mean, everything depends on the specific, so that's always a challenge with almost anything in nature, that the broader patterns and drivers of destruction and recovery, but there's always local nuance and variation. That's also what makes nature and ecology so fascinating, that everything has that local nuance and flavor.
May I add a thing? And I really like this because this is the real problem we have in marine ecosystems. We want to manage without the local knowledge. And this is impossible. You can have from global things, what are the needs, but to manage, I think it's mandatory, the local knowledge. You imagine, you will construct a road only with a mobility plan done at Europe scale. If you don't have the local needs and how the system works, you won't start doing anything. And I think that in marine ecosystems, what it's like is the real local knowledge, because it's very difficult to have. We don't have maps, cartographies. We don't have a correct cartographies. And when you have an habitat, just to know the complexity of the habitat, the species composition, structure, this is very difficult. So then it comes back to the first question, you are right, no? How we get the money to go for the local, what it's not fancy right now, you know.
Yes, yes. Totally.
Which is?
What is the baseline?
Is a concept a real concept, or is it something that we need to have an
So on the concept of baseline, I sort of have a nuanced view, a mixed view. I think that it's useful to know what in the different stages of the past were, because they can help inform us. Paleoecology, as I said, and other areas are important. But I don't think we should ever see them as targets as all. They're just extra bits of evidence that we use. And my view of nature recovery, I'd say, is about direction of travel. How do we increase ecological functionality, the ecosystem processes everywhere. So, also, where do baselines apply? Maybe we could apply baseline to a rewilding area or a protected area. What does a baseline even mean for a city or a farming landscape or those concepts? So I think it's just extra sources of information and not targets. And then let alone the fact that, where do we decide where the baseline is? Do we go back 1,000 years, 100 years, 50 years? And under climate change and invasive species, we can't even do that anyway. So I think that is an important element. I remember I was at a workshop a few years ago where we were looking at trying to set a pre-industrial baseline for the biosphere. Like in climate change, we often refer to 1700 as the baseline for climate change. And then as we had these talks, we realized actually probably the biggest phase of intervention of the biosphere was around the 18th century, with the European colonization, the plantation economy, the colonization of the Americas, of Asia. The biosphere was being transformed and disrupted in ways that probably haven't occurred until the late 20th century again. So if we pick a baseline of 100 years ago, we're in a deeply disrupted biosphere. more than we realize, even in places like Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and other places. So I think we should use baselines with caution. And I think conservation perhaps overly focused on baselines in the 1970s and 80s. I tend to not use them as much now.
Yeah, concerning some of the comments before, it's true that we need to connect with the people in each place, that's knowledge, but also what is sometimes difficult is also to let them know that the things are changing. Because some of the common practices they used to do are not anymore feasible or not recommendable in terms of, for instance, you see that in the not so many decades ago, the people was working in the agricultural land and no sparks, no problems of fires. But then now they have to change the shift. Now if they start to do these works when it's very high, risk of fire, and they still do because they think, it's a kind of complication. So it's true that we need to know what is happening in each place, but it's also true that we have to communicate that the things are not as they used to be, and it's even changing more. So this is something that also is a challenge when we communicate this global change. And the other thing that was mentioned about the people connecting to nature, what is sometimes for me is very strange that all these people that are deciding which trees, for instance, to plant in towns. Why not to plant the species that are already in the area? Why bring in so many exotic species that have nothing to do with the surroundings? And also when you walk just nearby the Palau Real, there is a park. You listen to many birds, even squirrels. Sometimes you see that they run. So this idea of, let's transform towns in a system that is completely different, that is outside. Why not to bring nature in towns and in the same way that, at least transition, not exactly bringing the wild boars in town or big mammals, but at least to start to keep knowledge on the nature is around. Yes. So maybe this is part of this connection between. Yes. I don't know if you want to say anything else to add. Maybe last words, but if you say something to the end, I think that's fine, and we can close the session now. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, I'll maybe bring a last thought on the baseline idea, given that we've been talking about that, and I brought it up with altered fire regimes and things. And I think a baseline is a very static idea, and we are not in a static world. This is a dynamic world in which it's a bit, and that might be controversial, but it's like the idea of an ecological climax. We know it doesn't exist. No. We have variability, we have things. So if we want to apply things and we want to compare them at some level in the past, more or less, we have to embrace this variability and uncertainty as well, which was indirectly addressed. And we could say, well, with reference levels to more or less what was happening. But I think one of the challenges is how we still keep a strong message while embracing variability and uncertainty in a messy world that we live in.
To just complement what Imma said, if you group different groups of stakeholders, if you gather different types of persons for one same site, for one same project, the baseline would probably be different depending on their history, their interests, their motivations. So, as you said, everything is dynamic, and we are also different. That what is the baseline? So, depending on your references, your ideas, your objectives, because we commented through the session that evaluation is so important, it's critical. Of course, for evaluating, you need objectives, because you evaluate in relation to objectives. So sometimes you need a kind of baseline. But depending on the project, on the group of persons, it would be different. So it shows that it's really variable and totally dynamic, as you said. So we need some kind of baseline, because we want to more or less understand where we want to go. Then following the trends, as you said, I think it's the key way of evaluating, following some trends of processes and key indicators, but the baseline, to make it very clear, and I think it's quite impossible.
Go ahead. Okay. Yeah.
Well, sorry, hi. Well, congratulations. It has been an amazing session today. And I was wondering how bad we do communicate science to the community and how much easy for other people is to give a short sentence. So my question is, could you give us a short sentence, each of you, in a short positive sentence to be taken by the university, to be taken by the society? Just for us, not to say depend, it's really complex because those things doesn't match with the need of a short communication to the people. And I think it's really important that we make it, that we go to the people and give the right messages. So I will ask you for you, as a dean of the faculty, give us some clear sentence, short ones. Thank you. I know it's difficult.
Okay. Okay. I'll start with 2 words, actually, then then a sentence to explain it. I think, for me, for communication, passion and hope. I think passion because actually science, ecology is amazing. There's so much, the living world is amazing. And I think, everybody I know who works in this has so much passion for it. And just to bring that passion for the earth into our communication. So sometimes we're trained as scientists to be, even we have that passion, we're trained to be very objective and cold, dispassionate and things. But actually, no, I think we need to re-engage that passion and communicate it. And hope, as I mentioned earlier, in this, I think part of the reason we're having this backlash against the environment is that the message has been one of despair and anxiety. And I think people are looking for something that motivates and gives them meaning, and bringing in hope, the clear-eyed hope, not this, it's going to be okay, but actually, no, we have work to do and we're ready to make that work. So I think those two are the most important messages in the communication.
Should I go? I would say also communicating a solution-oriented perspective on our results. Like, I think I was saying just a moment ago, embrace uncertainty and variability, but I think that sometimes as scientists, when we pass the message, we go a little bit, well, it depends, we're not sure, there is all this, we see it maybe, but maybe the error was too much, and when we give a message, we have to shine through what we are seeing, the patterns, the trends, the things. Give a solution-oriented idea that the person that has attention span of 10 seconds can get away. Giving hope as well. And
Quina és la teva?
my sentence. My sentence there would be that there is resilience of this world, and yeah, there is resilience, ecological resilience.
Many corners.
It's not easy. Then I would ask you the same.
Yeah. Well, I can tell it if you. I would say more integrative and holistic ecology, not only facts and figures. So put more feelings. It's connecting with what you said, passion, and active hope. I would add active, not only hope but active, to put actions in things we think deserve our effort and passion. Yes.
Okay, good. I think it's time to close the session. Thank you very much for all of you and for the questions. The questions and the answers. And remember that this later we have this meeting with postdocs, pre-docs, anyone who wants to join. We will reconvene here in this aula magna after lunch.
So